Yes, well, I came at a particular juncture in the Park Lane story because this was the time when a new circuit was formed and there was just one Norwich circuit. Now, St Peter's has always been Norwich number one circuit and the Calvert Street circuit the second circuit. And so for the old stagers and traditionalists, this was a tremendous loss of faith that in becoming one circuit, Chapelfield Road was to be the Supers Church. And then, of course, also for the last two ministries, there had been a younger minister who'd mainly done youth work and chaplaincy work at university. And the senior minister, who was superintendent of the circuit, was also the main preacher, I suppose, and the main pastor of the church congregation. So this was clearly something quite new, and obviously for the older ones it seemed like a come down, and they yearned for the halcyon days of the 60s with 450 in the membership and full morning and night, getting there early in order to get a good seat and the rest of it. This had not been the case in the last years of the 70s through a series of reasons, including the falling away of attendances generally throughout the country, I believe. But obviously what they were looking for when they were going to be just one minister was not an old man and not a young man, but someone in between who could both do the university work but also be the minister of the church, but would not have to do the administrative chore of being superintendent of a large new circuit. So I was very pleased to be able to come to the city, which is in a sense my home, though not, of course, the church, which was one that I had known intimately before. And as I'd been doing university chaplaincy work in Salford, it seemed to me that I could continue that interesting aspect of ministry, also continue with a strong church and town ministry, or in the community, and together do this in the place most congenial not only to myself, my growing family, because this was the place we'd always come to for holidays, and be quite near also to my father living the other side of the city. So we came with a lot of enthusiasm, even though it's a tremendous trauma to change circuits, and we'd had a great time in the Manchester and Salford mission and just finished building and opening a community church in the centre of Salford. So one felt that a great piece of innovative work had been done. What could happen, possibly could happen here? But talking with those who were perhaps younger and not so worried about the loss of status of not being the Cathedral of Methodism, or even if the Cathedral of Methodism not being the main church now of a new circuit, it was clear that we needed to find a new role. And to me it seemed the obvious role was that we should be much more a church of the neighbourhood in which we were set. I think it would be fair to say that in the old days of Park Lane, it didn't matter where you put the church down, they would have come because it was the thing to do to come to Park Lane. So if you put it on the moon or on a desert island, the people who wanted to go would have gone there because it was a place to go to, and many strengths about that, and terrific services of worship packed, and a wonderful days in many ways, but perhaps to the detriment of the local neighbourhood, who, although supporting it through the numbers of children in Sunday school, young people in youth clubs, and indeed members, on the whole it was a two nations church in my estimation. I might be quite wrong, and that I remember as a young man in Sproston, just coming on the plan and then being a student at college, that people would rib you if you were going to be planned to preach, say, just the evening. You wouldn't get in the morning, the evening at Park Lane. Well, you better put a smart suit on, and you better put your bicycle round the corner and walk the last bit, because they wouldn't expect to see your bicycle clips up at Park Lane. There was this kind of thought around the circuit that it was for the toffs, or it was a bit snobby. Now, I don't know anything about that, apart from that was the view that people had. But clearly, by the time I got it, most of that had really gone, and now the actual privileged position of First Church of Methodism in Norwich had also gone. It had changed, and there were younger people, I felt, and probably the older ones as well, but the younger people who certainly felt that there was a challenge. Either Park Lane had had its day, or else it had a new day to dawn. And I tried to share this idea of a community church. Obviously I'd come from developing a community church in a quite different situation in the centre of a city like Salford, quite different to the area around Park Lane, though Park Lane is set in close, as we know, in a close predominantly terraced housing. It's a mixed area, not a council area, of course, but quite a lot of need and quite a lot of bed-sit accommodation not far away where young people were. A lot of students living there, quite a lot of people who married again and restarting with new families in these small terrace houses, and quite a community of need one felt could be unearthed. And so the suggestion was put, don't we want to be a neighbourhood church much more, and discover the community around us and relate to this. But of course there was also a job to be done within the church itself first, and I think the first thing one tried to tackle was to get the church to feel a new confidence in itself. And there were two things here: a renewal of worship, and the attempt was made, which I had again used in Salford, of getting the worship on a Sunday morning to be more participatory. And we did have a day conference or a weekend conference at the first winter to promote this, and went across to Overstrand and talked about it together as 90 or so from the church, and set up a experimental period of a few months in which this was operative. Unfortunately, it didn't actually succeed, and maybe we didn't do enough homework on it. But it is interesting that I've done it now again in Aylesbury, but doing it on the basis of once a month. And perhaps if we hadn't been quite as ambitious and hoped to do it every week, we would have been better. The idea of this, of course, is, as you say, the idea of people sharing the news, people going into groups for some of the time, and also having worship all together. In fact, it is, of course, what Partners in Learning, the new Partners in Learning, is now attempting: all-age worship, and then group work as well. Anyway, I think the very exercise of doing that together was a way of getting us all together on the side of worship and fellowship. And the other thing that I felt was very important, the church had relied in the past, I felt, on the so-called moneyed people, and I suppose on the larger congregations actually putting in greater collections, and there was obviously a financial crisis. This gave me the opportunity to introduce the concept of Christian stewardship, which of course is not primarily financial, but does have the benefit of actually sorting the finances out. The idea, of course, of the stewardship was also to find more people who'd participate in the ongoing life of the work, more workers for various types of activity. And that was most successful. I mean, again, it was a fight to get it through, because some people feared Christian stewardship campaigning. Again, it's something which you need to do in the first year or so, or to propose in the first year or so of being at a church, because while the honeymoon period is there, they're willing to try anything or accept the new minister's word that it was a good thing. I had experience of this before, and I was on the national committee, church committee for stewardship. But we were very fortunate in that there was a former Christian stewardship director as a lay preacher within the circuit, and managed to get him to come and run our campaign. This had the advantage that we didn't have to actually pay overhead costs, which seemed to be a stopping point, though it shouldn't have been for some people in the church. And this, of course, did in fact revolutionise the financial situation of the church, but it also did find us some new people. And of course, the interesting thing is it doesn't just help the church. We, for instance, doubled the number of people willing to collect for Christian Aid Week and willing to collect for National Children's Home Week. Consequently, we more than doubled the income of those 2 weeks for those excellent outside causes. So there's lots of benefits from stewardship, and again it was a way of challenging the church to its spiritual task and to the discipleship that's required in these days. So those were two early things on the church side, and I think they were very important as a springboard for future activity in the community. Really, what with stewardship and the worship and thing, you would really think that perhaps we'd have let the 40th anniversary go, but we couldn't let such a good opportunity go. And the clear need was for a project of some sort, which could be also something we could put, we'd raise money for, because there'd be a project, something to mark the 40th anniversary. And with our concern to be more available to the community in which we're set, and being the only place with public rooms in the whole Nelson ward, as the local ward of the city council area, the Nelson ward that we were in, centre of that, and there were no public buildings, and it seemed to be a golden opportunity to open things up. But we had what is called the lecture hall, the back of the premises, which had been only used for Boys Brigade drill sessions and jumble sales and occasional five-side football and sort of thing. And
in later years.
Yes, I mean, well, when I was there, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that's what it was used for then. It was a rundown building, in which one of the older members said the best thing could happen to it is to blow it up, more or less. It was not worth doing, but we did think that there were possibilities there, and structurally it was seen to be okay. And so the project was that we might make this into a community centre and an entrance onto Avenue Road, which would mean that some people who perhaps didn't like coming into a church for their community things could see that the church was making available things which were not perjuring their souls, as it were, by having to be too closely related to the church. And so the lecture hall was very tastefully redone, with a coffee lounge and with officers and with a room for meeting. Now, in order to get this through, it was rather important, I think, to prove that there was some real need, and we were very fortunate there in that at that time the National Children's Home was beginning to look for premises in various parts of the country to run their family network, telephone advice service. And so I inquired of the principal of the National Children's Home whether perhaps they would like to come to East Anglia for one of their branches, and that if so, we had probably suitable rooms for them. And they bit on this one, fortunately, and came back very keen after a few months to start a family network from our premises. And we knew they also were quite willing to pay a reasonable rent. And I think this was crucial for the more money-minded people on our committee who needed to see where there would be some income for the expenditure we would lay out in putting the rooms right. We felt there were a lot of other things that would actually not only generate income, but more importantly, serve the community. But I think those two things have got to be borne in mind, that there are businessmen, and the businessman mentality within Park Lane was a very good thing in one sense, because otherwise harebrained scheme could have gone ahead and we'd have fallen on our faces by not being able to pay our way. But it always had to be harnessed alongside it with the vision of what the real work was. And so with the idea that we're going to get some real national recognition as a centre with the National Children's Home and Methodist Charity, a worthwhile piece of social work, and also one that would pay a good rent, it was a winner in terms of getting the initial okaying of the scheme. And so the scheme went ahead, and we raised some money, and we sought grants. Fortunately, we had a very helpful grant from the Joseph Rank Benevolent Trust, and we raised some money for it, and this was our 40th anniversary. I think it came, was it £14,000?
14,000, and 7 of that we had to raise ourselves, didn't we?
What I think was interesting about the stewardship campaign, one thing I remember about it was this, which I thought was memorable, that we did decide that each year after that, instead of the gift day for our own church funds, we would have a gift day of some sort for a overseas cause, or maybe a split between an overseas charity and a home charity. And the first of these was held at the time when we were resurfacing the roof of one of the flat roofs of the church. And outside the church, when the scaffolding was up, was not a poster which you'd find outside most churches saying, please help us raise money to put our roof right, but it was advertising a gift day for outside charities overseas and at home, and not a word about the roof, because that was being paid for by the people of the church through their stewardship commitment. This seems to me what the church is all about. We'll put our own house in order. We won't go and beg for other people, because if we believe in what we're doing enough, then we will put our own roof on. But what we do want to go to people outside for is to say they ought to join with us, or would they like to join with us in helping real need in the world at large. And I felt that was really symbolic of how far we'd travelled, in that we didn't have a poster outside asking people to give to our roof fund, but while the roof was clearly being done, we were asking people to give to causes through our gift day. Right. So once we'd got the thing opened, the renewed lecture room into a community centre, one of the things that we hoped to do was to have a drop-in coffee lounge. But again, we hadn't done enough, I suppose, market research of the area, and I suppose when people have lugged their shopping all the way home, and they're only about 100 yards from their home, they'd rather get home and empty it and have their coffee then, rather. We would be far better for a coffee situation if we were next door to Tesco or somewhere like that, rather than so far from that. But we thought that would be the case. That was a failure. Well, we tried these things. But what did happen, I think, was 2 or 3 other things. There was a request came in through a women's group in the area that there was a great need for an after-school club for those women who wished to work full-time and needed to work full-time, mainly single-parent women, single-parent families, and that all the other churches they'd been to had turned them down. And it seemed to me this was just the kind of thing we wanted to do, to show that we were really wanting to help the needs that were really there, not the needs that we thought were there, and those that were perhaps on the margins and perhaps even seemed to be not nice for those respectable churches and the like. And in fact, this is where we started. We discussed with them and set up what we then called the after-school care scheme, and it's still running, I understand, and I had a checkered history, I suppose, the ups and downs, but we did have some very good leaders during the period I was here at the beginning, and then more particularly one Barry, who was there for a solid period of time in the middle of my period here, and I would say that that was one of the best things that we did. And they used 5 days a week the main room between 3:30 and 6 o'clock, and they collected, with the help of part-time people. Again, we were able to use people from community projects, manpower services people, and this meant that I think it's called Project 79. No, was it Project?
It was originally.
Yeah, Project 79, which is again a church, is an interchurch set up to help the unemployed. And we did have people from there, so we were helping again with the unemployed. Now the great thing with having this in the evening was we'd already got we'd already got the play scheme in the morning, play group in the morning, and that's been going for years and had been, and it's been a very strong movement. Park Lane's renowned for its play group, but we were able to offer to 2 young people at a time a full job, because we had something in the afternoon as well. A lot of young people, would like to work with younger people on these schemes rather than the elderly, but they were generally put into the old folks' homes because that was a full day, they'd do enough hours. With playgroups, it's just the mornings. But with having someone working for 2.5 hours in a playgroup, having a break and then working for 2.5 hours or more, or 3 hours for after-school care, we were able to provide real employment for young people who really wanted to work with children and young people. So I thought it was very good, and then of course we paid the organiser and deputy organiser as well as these helpers. So the scheme was a very worthwhile thing, not only because it helped the children to have a good place after school to play in, rather than going to a childminder and being on their own and on the whole just being minded. They had social education, a chance to do things together, develop things together, play and the rest. So it was very worthwhile, and it helped some otherwise fairly impoverished single parents to be able to have full jobs, which made it worthwhile for them. And it was a good thing from our point of view. The other thing that developed with this new centre was our own junior youth club. The senior youth club had to have a break, and we thought we should start again with a junior club. And that junior club flourished with 50 or more youngsters every week. And there are many who've been through that club, and it's still going on. But we didn't seem to hold them when they came to the older years of youth club, not in the same numbers. But that, again, was something which we were able to do because there's a very nice lounge there, and they could have the larger hall as well for sports activities. And from that, of course, we developed some very good five-a-side football teams that were involved in the local leagues. So that it really became a mecca for the children of the area. I mean, there were lots of groups that began to come and ask for rooms once people had seen that we were clearly open to the public, clearly there disinterestedly seeking to meet need, and clearly not going to try and evangelise people or by other means use it as a way of getting more pew fodder. And once our integrity in these matters was established, others came along, and one of these, of course, was the adult literacy scheme in Norwich for that area. And this scheme worked for 2 or 3 sessions a week, mainly helping two sorts of people. One is the youngster who'd not been learnt to read and write at school, perhaps backward, or perhaps had just lost interest in it, or for various reasons, and now wanted to do the learning, reading, writing. But more particularly, a smaller group in this city, because it's not an area where there's a great lot of ethnic minorities, but quite a number of Asian and Chinese women who were learning the language. And so that added a little bit of variety and spice to the intake of people who came. And again, that's something that was a very good rental for the church, because again, being funded by the local authority, I should think, the adult literacy scheme, although my volunteers, they were able to pay a reasonable rent. So all in all, we were doing good, but also doing ourselves power of good in two ways. One, that it was paying its way, or more or less, and secondly, it was making our name in the neighbourhood as a neighbourhood church, as a church which really was concerned to try and meet needs, or at least open its premises to groups seeking to meet need in the neighbourhood. Because it's difficult to remember in what order some of the things happened in an 8-year ministry, but in fact one begins to get a bit breathless thinking about it all. But it did take 8 years in different ways, and many of these things fell into place with a stroke of luck here and there. I don't think it was entirely planned. But one of the things that I was concerned about, being a particular interest in social responsibility issues, was whether we could have some kind of group within the church that really was committed to third world issues and the like. And this, in the end, became known as the One World Group. I think it's far better to call it One World than Third World Group, because it was concerned to relate to injustices at home as well as overseas, and used to meet monthly, perhaps only 8 or 10 people committed to this, who would actually look at 1 month perhaps an issue at home, and 1 month an issue which was from overseas. But one of the keys to this group was it was to be a committed group of people who were prepared to pay something into a common fund, and out of which we would then send money to causes that otherwise wouldn't get support. But the kind of thing that we could support, because we were all committed to, I suppose, broadly speaking, a fairly leftish and fairly subversive kind of view of social responsibility and social justice, that we could all contribute and then decide together where some of the monies would go each month. And so things like, for instance, during the miners' strike, we could easily send money to the Barnsley Circuit's fund for the miners' wives and families. Now, had we put that before the church council to decide whether the church would give a grant, there would have always been some who would have objected, and it was political or that sort of thing. And it was marvellous to be in a group of people who were committed to that kind of cause. We sent money to the Greenham Women's Support Group and things like that we believed passionately in, or less passionately some of them, but at least knew that they would not get great grants through media telethons or even through any church funds, because there would always be people who would oppose them. And so from this I hoped and felt that some kind of para-church ought to develop, really, that was wider than Park Lane's membership and was of all those committed to social justice as a sort of a number one priority, of number one implication of the gospel. And later on we got quite near to that coming about. Of course, instrumental in this group, we had a number of people who were keen activists within the political world, but whose commitment came from their Christian discipleship, and I think particularly of Mark and Janet Bennett, who, of course, in the end were able to go and serve in Zambia, which was a great loss to us, but we were glad that they were having that opportunity, and they were very keen supporters of One World Group. But fortunately, just as they'd left, others came along, Liz Miles and Margaret Knighton, that's right, so that I believe the group has continued, and though it's changed its membership. Also, the other thing we were concerned to do within that group was to use tradecraft products and sell them, and that increased during the time through One World Group, and I believe that carries on.
Certainly does.
Yes. Now, one of the other things that we happened, and I suppose again it was a question of it happening, but we tried to facilitate it, was when we found that the district youth officer was unhappy with the accommodation that they had at Mile Cross. And so some of us again saw this would be a great opportunity to refurnish another small room that wasn't overused, and to make that the district youth office, again so that ourselves, I suppose, we'd have the spin-off of help from the youth office near at hand for our own developing youth work, and also that increasingly the district would see that as it used rooms for committees, so that we were committed to wider Methodism in the use of youth worker. And so I felt it was quite a useful thing that we had on the premises another full-time Methodist worker, and found myself often drifting down to that office to discuss matters. And because at the same time we did develop the office down at the church for the minister. Previous ministers, I believe, had felt that if they had a study at the house, that was sufficient. But part of the whole idea of being a neighbourhood church meant that we need to have availability of the minister, I felt, at the place. I think one of the first things I felt should happen if we were going to be a neighbourhood church was to get the minister to be seen to be down on the premises, and therefore we set up the vestry, redid the vestry as a kind of office with telephone and the rest. And that's an important move. I mean, not only was it important for me to be there and feel part of it, but I think it signalled something that the minister was not someone who was studying deeply for his Sunday sermon far away in a leafy suburb, and would come down and give the word quite detached from what was going on. That's very unfair, because I'm sure the other people didn't feel that. But symbolically, the fact the bloke was there, he was being interrupted the whole time, and glad to be, of course, because they never get down to it. But also getting involved and talking with, say, the leaders of playgroup every day over coffee and things like this, that people knew who you were. And unfortunately, however much we want to be the priest of all believers, they still sort of see you outside, see you as the vicar, even if you sort of see yourself more as a company secretary. Nevertheless, to be there and to be known by the people who use the premises, and to encourage them by your presence there, and to be available for people to talk with you, actually symbolically, not only symbolically, but actually in reality, was a significant move in terms of us changing the image from being the superintendent of the circuit and a circuit church to being pastor or minister within an ongoing community church or neighbourhood church.